Welcome back, everybody. This is AIX Higher Ed Podcast, and this is the update for August 26, 2025, looking at some of what's happened this past week and the implications for higher ed.
Yeah, so we're going to kick it off with our major themes. Last week we tried to cover the whole summer, which was a lot, so we're going to be a little more focused this week. Just a couple advances in the AI models, but some big achievements by AI and science and math. And of course, we had the new Grammarly tool everybody's talking about, and those meta glasses your students are going to be wearing soon to, maybe record your class and kind of check out what's going on. And we have some other emerging controversies and applications.
As for model advances, one of the biggest changes this last week is the addition of memory to projects that ChatGPT has, and Claude has deployed a similar feature. And you see some really interesting discussions about how you can draw upon that memory, even asking it for discussions or references to things that maybe you've talked about before. That's something that they've also said is a really important component of getting toward AGI. And Sam Altman has talked about how GPT-6 is going to really be focused more so on memory as a function that a lot of people are asking for, that it's going to be able to need, and you'll see capabilities that'll draw out because of it.
Yeah, it has a lot of practical implications. When I blog, I usually first talk through my blog with ChatGPT. And, at first I was like, I'd only remember the last couple of ideas that I wanted to talk about when I had it rewrite the draft. But then last week or so, kind of basically been remembering everything. So that's partially due to memory. The other quick thing I'll say is OpenAI, that's ChatGPT. They claim they're now at $1 billion in ARR. So, revenue is high, despite what some people, skeptics of AI are saying, oh, it's just a bubble and the whole thing's going to crash. The big companies are doing really well. Every small company won't make it. That's the bubble. But like the internet bubble, the internet's still here. And that's why we're doing this podcast. One of the big advances, and this hasn't got as much kind of popular discussion, probably as it deserves. But basically, some scientists, they ran an experiment where they had the different AI models work together, and the AI models themselves were to be able to go through every stage of the scientific process, basically from generating a hypothesis to running an experiment. And the experiment included that they went and they recruited live humans to be part of the experiment. They didn't analyze the data. And of course, as controversial in education right now, they wrote the papers, right? So I'm sure this will get a lot of scrutiny, but the fact that it was accomplished and now we're just going to see continuous improvements is a big deal. James Hudson talked about that on last week's podcast, where he talked about how the research process is going to be automated, right? He was saying he was realizing this back when ChatGPT first came out, and this is going to change higher ed, where people are kind of getting tenure based on research.
Huge implications, and it'd be easy to dismiss it as this is just a bit of a stunt. Maybe it's not going to be able to do the kind of work that we're looking at now, but as a proof of concept, this presents some real challenges, but also some real possibilities in terms of what that might allow for with future research, and that's something we'll certainly be following.
And in math, there's no way on it. You've known me since I was in high school. There's no way I can validate whether this is true. But Sebastian Bubeck, who is a math or physics professor at Princeton, then went to either OpenAI or Microsoft, and then now flipped from one to the other. He's a senior researcher there. Actually understands all the math, unlike me. He says that there's this math problem that humans have been trying to solve for years, and they've never been able to solve the whole problem. And with ChatGPT 05, they put it in the thinking mode, and it went for 17 minutes, and it solved the problem. So this is kind of a big deal, right? People say, oh, well, it can't count the number of straws in a strawberry, or it makes some mistakes, but it doesn't deny, right? We have jagged intelligence that it's now solving problems that humans have been unable to solve.
Now moving on to Grammarly, and there were some big changes and announcements coming out of Grammarly over the last couple of weeks, especially talking about the specialized AI agents that they're embedding directly into Grammarly docs. And Stefan's going to talk a little bit about what they include and also what the implications will be.
Yeah, so what they have is, they basically have the agents that can do the different parts of the the process you'd have your students do to write a paper. I mean, they try to put it in disguise and make it sound like, oh, well, all the students are just gonna, write the papers. But they have a citation finder, which is a tool to go find the references. They have a grader that faculty can use, but also that you can use to estimate your grade. That's a little controversial. We can talk about that later. They have a proofreader that, of course, proofread it. You can get reader reactions, like how are readers likely to react to your piece. If you want to paraphrase something out of an article, it'll paraphrase it for you. It'll offer some expert review. And of course, it has the plagiarism checker and then the AI, so, old fashioned plagiarism, where you're copying stuff off the internet, you can make sure that none of the stuff you quote unquote wrote has been copied off the internet, and that you can pass the writing detector regardless of how much AI you put in your paper. They also have a new AI writing surface where you can just kind of write within the system. And the one thing that people are kind of a little most freaked out about is kind of the AI grader predicting your potential grades, right? So it's like based on, say, the professor's rubric or whatever they're giving you for how the paper will be graded, it'll grade based on that. I've seen other things that'll also like research the professor to see, what kind of grades they normally give or feedback and incorporate that. That latter part I did not predict. I will say in the first presentation about AI that I ever gave to a school, I said we're going to have kids uploading their papers in their rubrics into the AI systems, getting a grade, and as long as it's like a high B or an A, if they don't get that, from Dr. Rao because he's a hard grader, they're going to first go into his office and then they're going to try to escalate it and say, hey, the AI, is unbiased, unlike Dr. Rao, and it gave me a fair grade. So this has kind of ignited a little bit of a firestorm, because I think for a lot of people, this is the first time they thought about this happening, and kind of undermines these ideas of like, the human getting the final say.
What's interesting about it is that it's not the first time we've seen this deployed. I remember about 2 years ago, there was a teacher in New Jersey that was using PlayLab, and they even featured him in one of their ads and one of the videos they had online about building something that students, it was trained on his rubric. The students could get immediate feedback. While it didn't assign an exact grade, it certainly told the students how well they did compared to the rubric.
Right.
And the idea of being able to allow them to benefit from it, to be able to improve their paper, that's certainly been there. I think what's striking about this is that it's built into a commercial product, of course, and calling it AI grade and referring to it that way is something that's pretty controversial. The other side of it, of course, is that also there's been pushback from students and from parents about teachers using AI to grade and concerns about AI grading their work instead of the instructor actually grading it. And so this is a pretty thorny issue on both sides, really.
Yeah, people are going to be talking about this for a while, and it also has huge distribution, right? It's just a little PlayLab thing that somebody built. They're using it, or a few people using it. That's different than Grammarly, but it's just kind of all over the place, and often provided by educational institutions.
Now moving on to Meta's smart glasses, and this is not an entirely new issue. Of course, we've had some smart glasses out before, but they're getting better and better in their capabilities, being able to capture lectures and demos, thinking about visual language assistance, instant lookup and assistance. There are some good cases to be made for assistive devices like this for students that perhaps need some other ways to access course materials. But part of the controversy and some of the concern about this is that if students are accessing this content or using these glasses or something like this in class, they're getting other kinds of feedback. It's not just a matter of assisting them with understanding content, but perhaps even preparing them with other content and giving them other feedback that maybe the instructor hasn't really allowed for. They offer this as AI-guided learning and feedback, and also multimodal note-taking. These are going to take off, and it's going to be really difficult when you get to the point where a student with prescription glasses is only wearing Meta glasses or AI glasses. It's kind of hard to say they can't have it. It's not the same as saying they can't bring their phone into the class or their watch into the class. This is something that will be tested, I'm sure, in some different ways. And there are a number of different kinds of AI glasses that are out there, not just Meta, but a number of companies are making them. The prices are coming down. And this is just another reason why we have to confront incorporating AI into the classroom. You can't simply ban it because it's not going to be possible. And I like the phrase Stefan has used, ambient AI. This is AI that is really all around us, that is being incorporated into our day-to-day practices and workflows.
And to pick up on, thanks for the compliment on the ambience, right? I'm just more and more that this is AI is not something you have to go get on your laptop, right? It's everywhere, and it's right in the search in Google, right? So we have the AI overviews. We've had them for a while. They're not very good, right? But that is an example of ambience, right? It's like you tell your student, like, well, don't use AI in this project, and it's a research project. And they go to Google and they type in their topic. The first thing they're going to see, right, is something from AI. So how do they not really use it? But even then, it's like, Google AI overviews are not very good, but right next to the search, there's this thing that says like AI mode, which works really well. It comes from the Gemini Pro model 2.5, which is very good. And it'll give you a lot of really good results and a lot of really good articles, right? I mean, I grew up Catholic, so the first thing I'm thinking about is like Adam and Eve and like eating from the apple, right? Like, how do you tell the kid, like, there's the button, like right there, but don't press it, right? And if something comes out in the AI overview, don't look at it. That's the kind of stuff you shouldn't be looking at online. So it's a good example of ambience, but it's also like, hey, like, the realities here, people should be aware of this, that this really high quality AI is like in every tool.
And it's being incorporated in more than just search, but also into a lot of the platforms and the different apps that people are using. It used to be, maybe the way to think of it also is, it used to be opt in for most of the generative AI tools, and now it's really opt out. And once we've crossed that barrier, it's very difficult to say that there's no AI within the classroom, because of course there is, especially any classroom that's using Chromebooks. There are going to be AI elements, and that's why we see a lot of schools that are adapting and starting to incorporate them to talk about it, not just for AI literacy and fluency, but also to make sure that they address the ambient AI issue.
We've also seen some new controversies related to AI come up, which is not surprising. So the first is a study that came out of MIT. And I tell you what, there's this other study that came out of MIT. That's the one about like, oh, if you write a paper with AI, you don't learn anything, kind of obvious, but really small sample size. Like these studies are, that was like a 300-page article, but the study's not very good. And even though it comes from MIT, and here we have another study from MIT that's not really very good, but the study kind of concluded that 95% of the time when they try to like deploy AI into traditional businesses, it really wasn't working at like the business level, like the full kind of integrative level. It only studied like 56 businesses or something like that, which is a very small sample size. But the other problem is that, to me, when some people were like, see, AI doesn't work, and I kind of had the opposite reaction. I was like, this business is doomed, right? Like if this business can't like incorporate AI, they're not going to be able to compete, and you're going to have like basically AI native, or companies that are kind of built around AI. They're going to come into that same space, and they're going to beat them out.
What's really interesting about the reaction to this is that there has been a lot of discussion about an AI bubble. So even just this, I think it was Fortune magazine reported on this report. The report wasn't even generally available. It was difficult to get a hold of it. But just from this report of the MIT report, it moved markets. Billions of dollars were lost. Ethan Mollick has written about this and had a really good, I think, a fairly even-handed approach in looking at this to say, look, there are some questions about the methodology, certainly the sample size. There's not enough there to say that it should move markets the way that it has. And there are also some questions about what that really means. And as Stefan mentioned earlier in today's podcast, the idea of a bubble doesn't mean that everything then goes away. The bubble that occurred in the late 90s with the internet bubble, there were companies then that were small or even well established that didn't make it. They just didn't survive. Then there were some that were smaller, mid-sized, that did make it, like Amazon, and grew tremendously. What's really interesting about the reporting of this MIT report is the groups that did have success with generative AI pilots were those that were AI first, typically smaller and a little more flexible, a little more nimble in terms of what they were doing. And they're probably the ones that you would expect are going to be more successful. The last thing to say about this is that it's not that the AI was failing. It's the application of the AI pilots were failing. And another interesting analysis that I've read is that, of course, AI pilots are going to fail. If you're not failing at some of your pilots, then you're not really pushing the envelope enough. You don't expect all of them to work. So a number of caveats. It's certainly something to take seriously. The idea of rolling out AI across the enterprise is something that's not going to be that easy. And there are a lot of different reasons why that might be the case in terms of leadership, in terms of workers in different sectors. But there are a lot of caveats certainly to this report, and that's something we have to think about when we're incorporating it into the classroom as well.
Yeah, another controversy came up. Mustafa Suleyman, co-founder of DeepMind, sold to Google. He started his own company, Inflection AI. Kind of that didn't work out, so then he went to Microsoft, where he's a vice president of AI. So a big person in the history and the field of AI, has a big leadership role, and he's become very concerned that he really believes the AI models are not conscious, which is what the overwhelming majority of people believe. There are a few dissenters, and there's some people who believe they will become conscious. But irrespective of that debate, he says they're seemingly conscious, and they're going to become more and more seemingly conscious. And when we're having an interaction with them, a lot of people are they think they're conscious, or at least they're interacting with it in a way that it's conscious, like assumes that it's conscious, even when there's maybe a disclaimer that says this is a chatbot and it's not conscious or whatever, right? And they have this, and they're kind of getting really kind of caught up in essentially a really addictive, in a bad way, like personal relationship with a chatbot. And I saw someone kind of post a psychiatrist who said he knows of 10 people who have developed such extreme psychosis as a result of this, that they end up being hospitalized. So it's a very small percentage of people. It's like less than 1%. But when you have, a billion people at this point using chatbots, that's a lot of people. So he's really, really been speaking out about this. And there's a test. It's called SpiralBench, and it tests which chatbots are more likely to lead you. Like, maybe you're having this conversation and it kind of gets emotional, and you get really emotional. Like, which one kind of makes it worse, right? It's like that friend who kind of adds drama when you're upset, rather than tries to kind of like, get you to relax and kind of calm down, and maybe move the conversation somewhere else, because they realize it's not good for you to kind of carry on this way. But we can see some different models here. I think DeepSeek was the most likely to cause a psychotic break. But there's a couple things here that are pretty interesting. So there's ChatGPT 5. We talked about this last week. When they took ChatGPT 4.0 away from people got upset because they kind of thought it was like their friend. And ChatGPT 5 was just kind of like this neutral, like logical model. And when it was at the top of the leaderboard for like the safest model. But then they gave ChatGPT 5 a personality, so more people would use it. And now it's kind of like mid ranked, right? So you think about it, these companies are like in a little bit of a bind. Like people want the models to kind of be friendly and interact with them, but then there's some risks that some of the psychosis could develop, to the extent that somebody developed a test for it.
Really interesting to think about the interpersonal relationships between people and bots and how that plays out. There are obviously researchers working on this, and many of the ethicists within their own companies are kind of trying to consider this. But that push and pull that Stefan's highlighting is really a concern, and certainly something we should be talking to students about, I think, as well.
Yeah, and we're only dealing with text. We're primarily dealing with text chatbots at this point, right? We have some voice. Some people are using it in voice, but we're going to have it in video and images, and it's going to become immersive right in the classes. It's going to aggravate the situation. There was a study that came out that it's kind of rough, right? Like it says, like, students who cheat are more likely to use generative AI tools for academic work. And then what they did is they kind of tried to analyze the personalities of the cheaters, and they found people that were quote unquote, had dark personality traits, that they were more unlikely to cheat. And I'll just kind of use cheat as a placeholder. We could have a whole discussion about using the tools and whether or not that's cheaters, but they found that the people who used these tools in ways they weren't supposed to had these certain personality traits. And then they actually suggested that universities try to identify students who had these quote unquote dark personality traits to prevent them from cheating. And they just wrote this like as if it was nothing. But what are we? You talk about like a dystopian future, right? Like you show up on campus and they use some AI to run some personality tests on you to determine if you're likely to cheat, not just with generative AI, but anything, and then engage in some psychological intervention to, to correct you. I'm surprised this hasn't gotten more traction than it has, but it's kind of disturbing.
It is disturbing. I think what also really rubs me the wrong way about it is that any concerns about cheating, it tends to suggest that cheating with AI is the primary concern we have on campus. Why wasn't this ever the approach that somebody would have taken? I can't imagine within any discussions of academic integrity in the past before a generative AI that
Oh,
somebody would
yeah.
have said we should identify dark personality traits or what that might mean for what they do. It just it comes across as kind of grasping at straws, and certainly doesn't address maybe if there are concerns about the way students are approaching it or individuals are approaching the use of certain tools, that we have discussions about AI literacy, about ethics involved with uses, and a better, broader discussion about when it's acceptable or not acceptable to use it. It seems like devoting our energy to that would be a lot more productive than trying to identify dark personality traits. Yeah, a disturbing approach certainly, and maybe the reason we haven't gotten a lot more traction of it is that it's hard to take it as seriously as it appears to be taking the issue. Moving on to some emerging capabilities and some recent developments within AI.
So there is it's called like Marlin 2. It's a new like visual, I guess we'll broadly describe it as technology where you can just take, this is like a child's drawing of a house, and then it creates a video where the child is walking around. And here we can see it just in black and white. But you can also, if the child draws it in color, you can see it in color.
And pretty amazing. It's very similar to the way we were talking about Genie 3 in the last update. It's not just a video, but it's something that's interactive, that it's actually immersive in kind of a world model that's built from that individual photo, which is pretty remarkable. And I think some really positive capabilities there. And when you think about even just a child's drawing in terms of what you could do with it and building on their creativity. And it falls in line with what we were talking about with Genie 3, is that when you have these kinds of world models that are capable, then you can do a lot with training. There are a lot of other capabilities with more advanced applications with robotics, certainly. And it'll be interesting to see how this develops. This looks like a really remarkable tool.
Yeah, they said that the next level is that the kids will be able to like take family photos or photos of friends, create these things, and then build like real life video games about the people around them, right? Like right inside the video game. Finally on the application side, we see Elon Musk. He's just teasing this. He's trying to recruit people, but basically he wants to compete with like Microsoft Office, and he wants to build all the applications. I'm sure people will be involved to a degree, but he wants to have AI agents build all, Microsoft Word, PowerPoint, Excel, all your Office applications.
And clever as always, instead of Microsoft, he's calling this Macrohard, tongue-in-cheek name, but he says the project is very real.
And, we also have a new video thing just dropped yesterday called Nana Banana. I mean, these are some really impressive images and video. So we're seeing, this is kind of state of the art of the moment. If you followed this at all, think about back to like July 2023 or 2022, because we had a little bit generative AI images. I mean, you could barely make out the people.
What was interesting about this is a code name for the application. They haven't been able to identify exactly where it came from. Most are speculating it came from Google. And then once that discussion was started, there were a couple of Google engineers that put bananas as icons on their profiles. So guessing is probably Google. They haven't confirmed that yet. But if so, then it's certainly an advance on what they've been able to do with VO and VO3. Maybe this becomes VO4. But they said it's remarkable that it's a much smaller model. It's more capable. It's faster. And it's able to do really remarkable video creation. So we're just seeing the multimodal advances happening very quickly. It's not just text-based. So that wraps up everything that we're talking about this week. Next week, we'll be joined again. We'll be joining you again to talk a bit about some of the new developments and looking at those applications as we get into the fall semester.